So we'll start by setting our motivation. So as we know, the purpose of the Course is to familiarize our minds with the teachings of the Buddha in the way that they are presented in the Lamrim, using the Buddha's teachings to progress step by step, gaining the wisdom, the insights that separate us from being a Buddha, moving in that direction day by day. We think that the value of accomplishing that is to provide ourselves with the ability to benefit sentient beings, to know their minds directly, to be able to emanate limitlessly in every realm where suffering sentient beings exist, and to be completely free of any mistake, any error. So we generate these minds of confidence, refuge, and bodhicitta. All right. Good afternoon. So with you guys just being here, just so you know, I may have said before, but I can't spotlight myself with just one other person, so you'll get recorded if you say anything. So just so you know, you can turn your video off if that is an issue, but I can't spotlight myself unless somebody else shows up. Okay, so just a little bit of a roadmap. There are 5 additional chapters in the book after this one, and there are 5 additional months in this year. So I'll be sticking to 1 chapter per month, trying to make sure we can finish by the end of the year. That shouldn't be too much of I don't think, of an issue. I think we can, and that also means that we'll be getting through the remainder of this material by the end of July, which again, I think if we can cover maybe 3 contemplations per day, we'll be able to do that without skipping, but we also probably can skip a little bit and without too much of an issue as well. But that's the roadmap for the rest of the year. Okay. So we are on day 192. And the quotation from Lama Yeshe is, "The uncontrolled mind makes life a disaster, which is why emphasis on control is essential." So this kind of gets at the phrase that's common with the teaching on karma called guarding karma, or guarding the 3 doors, the ways in which we create karma, the door of the mind, the door of the speech, and the door of the body. And this gets at, as we've talked about in all of the previous modules or chapters, content areas, the idea of introspective awareness, the idea of vigilance is all connected to this, where what we are getting at is that understanding the law of cause and effect intellectually is necessary. That's the beginning of applying the wisdom of the law of cause and effect, but actually applying it refers to guarding the three doors and not allowing the mind to give in to these impulses that where we might be deceptive or we might be have ill will and so on. So becoming aware in deeper and deeper ways of when negativity is arising in the mind and effectively applying an antidote. And of course, as Lama Yeshe, says here in this contemplation, we will make mistakes. We're not yet enlightened, so even bodhisattvas are making mistakes compared to Buddhas. Compared to us, they make pretty minor mistakes, but they don't get it right completely until full enlightenment is achieved. And so, he says that when we do make an error, he says we should acknowledge it, and he says we should even feel happy about it. It's thinking that it's good that I noticed, meaning that now we have a different way of relating to unskillful actions. We understand the difference between a skillful and an unskillful action, correct action and a mistaken action. Whereas before, we may have been operating under a different philosophical system, and we may have even been told, oh well, you might have to use violence, to defend yourself, or rather than, and Buddhism would not encourage that. They would encourage establishing a boundary in a healthy way, but not to actually use violence to get your point across. Or but certainly there are many people who settle disputes through that kind of aggression, and they maybe they grew up in, you could call it a philosophical system where that's presented as sort of the way things are done. And we should rejoice, or even just something like maybe hunting, hunting for sport rather than if we're not in a life or death situation where we're doing it to survive, but we're doing it for fun, and then we have we correct that later on. And now we recognize that that's an unskillful action. We should feel grateful that we've learned better, more accurate philosophical systems that that hold us back from suffering. And so, of course, then that is related to don't let it happen again. That's fine. So I've spotlighted myself now, so everyone is safe from the internet, aside from myself. So when we do make a mistake, we take that now as an opportunity to engage in purification, and to try to do better. Next time, try to refrain ourselves, in the future. So that's kind of what he's saying in day 192. Any thoughts or questions about day 192 or anything from last week that didn't get covered?
Venerable, I'm assuming that it's not inappropriate to defend ourselves if we're attacked, or to help someone else if we see someone else being attacked.
So, I mean, in terms of killing, the karma of killing, there isn't any way in which we can say that there's a way to do that where there's not some sort of non-virtue. Even in the Jataka tales, the Buddha took the life of a person using clairvoyance, understanding that he was going to kill take the lives of many other people, and that there, in his clairvoyance, he recognized that there was no other way, and we're not clairvoyant, of course, so we don't know, and so I mean that was he was, he was relatively advanced, had very little, he was not enlightened, but did have clairvoyance, was able to discern, um, and still, there was a negative, he experienced a very short trip into the hell realms. I think he was able to generate great compassion, which is unusual, not generally, in the hell realms. Generally, you're not able to generate any kind of positive mental state because of the overwhelming suffering. But even still, under those were perhaps the most ideal circumstances one could imagine, and yet there was still some negativity that was created. So the idea would be that if we, if it seems like it's absolutely necessary to use some force, we should try to use the least amount of force that seems possible, under the situation. Of course, if we can just withdraw, from the situation, that's the way to go. Generally, even if, we might lose possessions, we might lose, if we can withdraw and just leave, or something of that sort, that's the way to go. um, if aggression, if physical, aggression is if seems necessary, then um, we really should try to use the least amount that's necessary to keep ourselves or someone else safe. Um, of course, I mean, as I always say, when this sort of the good news is that statistically, it's unlikely that anyone is going to be in a situation like that. Of course, I understand defense of a loved one, that sort of thing. But again, from the Buddhist perspective, that's attachment. I mean, it's completely understandable, and I'm not suggesting that people not be attached to their children, that people not, but it is compared to enlightened, an enlightened being's way of thinking about it. Why is it that we would kill to protect this one person? But if we saw a complete stranger being attacked, we probably, we would be like, well, that's none of my business, or we might be willing to maybe act as a distraction, or honk our horn, or try to flag down the police, but we probably wouldn't put ourselves in a situation where our own life was in danger, most likely, generally speaking. Whereas we would if it was our child, or so that that's attachment from the Buddhist perspective. There's no valid basis for saying that the life of our child is any more deserving of being protected than a total stranger. They're both equally deserving of having their life continue, but our willingness to put ourselves in a dangerous situation is going to be different. And so we're operating then not from a place of wisdom, not from a place of impartiality, but from a place of emotionality and attachment that is exaggerating one situation as compared to another. Completely reasonable, completely normal and natural and understandable. But the fact that those obscured states of mind are operative is not great, compared to being able to get rid of those states of mind. Because that person that we're attached to, they're going to die anyway. And they might not die for some number of years, but we don't understand the karma of what's happening. We don't understand what their next rebirth is going to be like, under what circumstances it would be better or worse for them to pass away into that next rebirth. There's all kinds of things that we can't see, and we're reacting with incredibly limited information, and we're acting out of these obscured mental states. So yeah, it's in a conventional sense, given our limitations, it's not reasonable to say that we just you know not intervene, or that but when we if we feel like and that some aggressive action is the only thing that's open to us as being effective, then hopefully we try to use a non-lethal means of accomplishing that. And if 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 we don't, if then we just try to purify that, and we spend the rest of our lives trying to purify that, and we try to do it with as much reticence and regret as we can, and not revel in it, not think it's good, not but like I said, hopefully, statistically speaking, generally people go their whole lives without being threatened in that way. So that's useful, that's helpful. But okay, so day 193, Lama Zopa here is talking about, previously, as I kind of said, these other contemplations, these earlier contemplations, they were really focused on negative karma. And I was like, I was kind of bringing in other perspectives because it was sort of focused. And here he does bring that in, where he's focusing in on the 10, what he's calling the 10 virtues, which really are just the opposite of the 10 non-virtues. Successfully avoiding the 10 non-virtues are the 10 virtues. So it's really just sort of not committing. Then maybe the wish or the intention or the opportunity arises to, or the thought arises, but then we restrain ourselves. We recognize that that's not the thing to do, and we hold ourselves back from that. And then he talks about also cultivating the virtuous minds of non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-ignorance. So, because again, and so these are talking about the three root delusions: attachment, ignorance, and hatred. So from those root delusions, all negativity in one way or another is going to flow through one combination. So by opposing attachment and hatred and ignorance through the cultivation of various positive mental states, ultimately wisdom, realizing the nature of reality, but also all of the effective antidotes of patience and loving kindness and understanding, the shortcomings of attachment and trying to look at things more holistically and so on, cultivating all of the effective antidotes to the three root delusions, then we make it, then we're kind of addressing the mental states that are responsible for why a person would kill or would steal or would lie or would engage in sexual misconduct or would have harsh speech, divisive speech, etc. Those, without those motivating afflicted states, those non-virtuous actions would have no basis for ever arising. So he's encouraging also the antidotes to those root delusions. And so here again, as I mentioned before, we won't go into it again, but in as much detail. But the four ripening results that we talked about before, as I mentioned, they're a feature of karma generally. So the previous emphasis was on non-virtue, but here he brings it into focus with respect to virtuous actions. So again, the ripening result is the rebirth, the realm. So there would be an upper realm rebirth, environmental result. He says some examples could be a beautiful place, wealth, access to resources, good food, etc. And then the result similar to the cause. And I wanted to mention, it occurred to me, the way that it was previously, I think the phrasing when this came up before, the phrasing was a little bit uncommon to me, because it was something like the creating the let me see if I can find. I just wanted to mention a different kind of phrasing that wasn't it like what we just covered? Yeah. Yeah, creating the result similar to the cause is how it was, which was the habituation to the action and experiencing the result similar to the cause. So another was the way in which that karma would ripen in terms of our experiences. The phrasing the other alternative phrasing was the result similar to the cause in my actions and the result similar to the cause in my experiences. That is a little bit slightly different phrasing that's a little bit more common to how I've seen it in other texts. Instead of creating the result similar to the cause and the result similar to the cause in my, it's just a little bit different. I have always said the result similar to the cause in my experiences and the result similar to the cause in my actions. It's just kind of I feel like a little bit simpler way of talking about those two of the four ripening results.
Venerable, is this associated with throwing karma? Or is
that's the ripening result. So the ripening of these four, the ripening result is the throwing karma. the result similar to the cause in my experience, the result that is that could be a complete karma. That's not a throwing karma, because a throwing karma only applies to at the moment of death, when we are thrown into a rebirth. So that's a specific karma that only ripens at the time of death and is responsible for creating the realm of a rebirth. That kind of karma has to be a complete karma in order that no other type of karma can generate that. Once a rebirth is established, all of the karma that ripens during that lifetime is called a completing karma, which means that it is going to create the details of that lifetime of experience, and those are ripening and passing away just every day, every moment. Karma is ripening and passing away, in every moment of that existence, from birth until death. That can be complete karmas or incomplete karmas. They're both capable of ripening within a given lifetime and filling out all of those details. The result similar to the cause in my actions is really just talking about any kind of karma is a type of habituation, whether it's a complete or incomplete, or anything, any intentional act is going to, by definition, create greater familiarity, greater habituation, and by virtue of greater habituation, greater familiarity, we naturally become more inclined to engage in that type of action. So that's the result similar to the cause in my actions. Okay. So here again, the result similar to the cause in my actions. Again, the phrasing here in the text is creating the result similar to the cause. But with the example for virtuous actions, he says, because we've taken vows to refrain from the non-virtues in a previous life, because generally karma takes more than one lifetime to actually ripen. So, and made offerings to the Buddhas and so forth, we will naturally do these virtuous activities again in this life. In this way, we ensure that our happiness can only continue to increase. So, but again, I would say that the phrasing that I'm familiar with is the actions, the cause similar to my in my actions, the result similar to the cause in my actions, meaning my future actions. When I habituate the mind to virtue, then in my actions in future lives, I will be habituated to virtue. When I create the non-virtue, then in future lives, I'll be habituated to non-virtue. Any thoughts or questions? Day 193. Okay, so then in day 194, I think really Lama Yeshe is just reiterating what has come up before in this section, which is the quotation: the nuclear energy of life and the nuclear energy of actions is the motivation, not the action itself. Lama Yeshe used the word nuclear a lot. Again, I've said, I think it's because he was teaching in the 70s and late 60s and 70s. There's a lot of, concern about nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. And so he used that a lot in his teachings because it was just sort of in the zeitgeist of the culture at the time. As a phrasing that he liked to use. But that's just my take on it. So he says, in Buddhism, we feel that an action may look religious or non-religious, but it is difficult to distinguish whether it is good or bad. The distinction of good and bad comes from our attitude. Behind each action, there is the history of the action in our mind. Every action is interdependent, and it is our attitude of mind that makes the action good or bad. So, and then he gives the example of someone who does something that would look religious or spiritual, like sponsoring a monastery, giving money, having lots of pujas, done or something. But in Lama Yeshe's example, the person doing this action, he said, had the mind of the 8 worldly concerns for the purpose of enhancing his reputation. So there may have been a lot of benefit that flowed from the actions of the monks and the nuns, all of the prayers, all of the practices, their actions that he sponsored, they could very well have brought lots of benefit. But for that benefactor, the person supplying the money for the food and the, substances and so on, he was doing it because he wanted people to look at him and think, oh, what an amazing practitioner he is, or, how generous or how kind, or that's what was happening in his mind. So he only, or predominantly, largely incurred a non-virtue because he didn't have any thought in his mind of what was actually happening, the real, genuine benefit that was flowing from that action. In a similar way, a person could donate money to a hospital, and that hospital might use it to save many people's lives, and that's wonderful. But the benefit karmically is, accrues, the positive benefit karmically would accrue to the doctors, the nurses, and so on that were actually wanting to help, that were actually wanting to save those lives. If that person wanted to get their name in the paper, wanted a tax deduction, then they accrued no virtuous karma, or perhaps, it could be somewhat mixed. They might have some recognition that some good would come from it, and to the extent that they were partially motivated, then there would be some negativity and some positivity. It may not be all one or the other, but it's at least mixed. It's not as virtuous as it would have been had it been done anonymously, had it been done only because of understanding the benefits, wanting those benefits, and not wanting to get recognized, not needing to be seen in a particular way due to that. So we can't know. What Lama Yeshe is also saying is that we can't look at someone's action and say, oh, how wonderful, that we can recognize that there are benefits. If someone builds a monastery or what have you, we might say, oh, that's amazing that there is a monastery and there will be benefit, but we can't say that that the individual accrued virtuous karma as a result of that, or at least not entirely, because we don't know why they did it. Maybe they wanted, maybe they were paying a bribe in order to, be able to get away with criminal activity, and all kinds of things could be why they did a certain thing. And so we can't look at it and judge it as virtuous or non-virtuous. So, as I've said before, in this scheme of the 10 non-virtues is really just pointing out things that are difficult to do with a positive motivation. Here, Lama Yeshe's example is an example that is kind of, could go either way. It's not, when you're giving money to someone, the action itself kind of lends itself to being more virtuous or less virtuous. But with respect to the 10 non-virtues, those are more difficult, and in some cases almost impossible. As we talked about before, they become the circumstances under which it could be done in a non-virtuous way become increasingly more difficult. But for high-level bodhisattvas, certainly there are options that are available to them because of the purity of their mind, and their ability to understand the karma of the situation and so on, perhaps clairvoyance, where they can transform more things than we can transform. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. So then day 195, Lama Zopa, the quotation, "We have the freedom, very few people have the freedom to create as much positive karma as we wish." So here again, Lama Zopa is putting this in a context. When he says we, he does mean not necessarily, it seems like from the quotation, not just humans, because of course, in general, humans have more access, to, are really the only beings ordinarily that have any real access. Other beings are hell realm beings and spirit realm. What virtue is at all possible in other realms? Very generally, very little. So human is kind of the base prerequisite, but really seems like he's talking about a perfect human rebirth, which necessarily, because if you look at that, you're talking about, a Buddha has come and taught, the teachings exist, there's a community it's a living tradition with practitioners, oneself has genuine interest, and oneself is engaged, is applying, themselves to some degree. So really, from a historical standpoint, kind of talking about Buddhists, to be honest. So because he says here, it is said that if we were to put all the worldly beings of all the universes into prison and bind them, this would not be as heavy as simply glancing sharply with anger at a bodhisattva. And we've talked about, the power of the object, like bodhisattvas, gurus, enlightened beings, one's parents. Those are karmically heavy objects. So in a way, he's talking about how by studying the teachings, we come to understand things in a subtle and more difficult to understand way. So we gain access to knowledge that's not common, that's not, that we're able, through introspective awareness, through, training, we're able to guard karma in ways that you can't unless you have that wisdom, you have that knowledge. If a person doesn't know this, if a person doesn't care about this, then they might not have any regard for guarding their karma in that way, and guarding karma in general, really paying attention to karma. When he says, conversely, then, looking at a bodhisattva respectfully with a calm mind creates much more merit than giving sight to all the sentient beings of all three realms combined. So, curing blindness, he's saying, the suffering of blindness in all realms of every human within all of reality is not, again, due to the power of the object. So he says, once we've made that dharmic connection, we start to relate to holy objects, our positive karma can ripen quickly and powerfully. He says, once we make the decision to connect to the Dharma, the power created makes the three rare sublime ones, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, jewels, the most powerful objects. These powerful objects are the perfect field in which to grow our merit. Anything we do with the Dharma is much more powerful than mundane work. He says, for example, just as giving the Dharma is the best form of giving, making offerings of our Dharma practice to the Guru and the three rare sublime ones is the best form of offering we can make. So in a way, it's kind of unlocking this new technology, this new ability. Before, we might be able to make offerings, like he's saying, to charities and so on, but making an offering of our spiritual practice to our Guru and to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and so on, the power of that karmically, maybe not in an observable, mundane kind of way, but karmically over lifetimes, the benefit of that, which we can only unlock, the understanding of that, the wisdom of that, the ability to engage in that is hidden, is prevented, from us. We're separated from us without study, without understanding the teachings and applying ourselves. So in that way, only people who are applying themselves and uncovering those ways of extraordinarily deep karmic avenues and pathways are able to, generate the causes of enlightenment quickly and easily.
Venerable, is this one of the reasons that dedication is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an example of what to do. If a person, it's an example of, just like the teachings on guru devotion. A person might think, might consider themselves Buddhist, but they don't, maybe they haven't studied guru devotion, maybe they haven't cultivated guru devotion. So that all of that benefit is still blocked from that person, right? Even though maybe they've taken refuge, maybe they're meditating, but they haven't really, they haven't, and of course that's not like an on-off switch. I'm not suggesting, that's a lifelong training that, deepens and grows and changes. But unless and until we make effort in that direction, there's a limitation there in terms of what, because if we go back to that contemplation, Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, they said it isn't the efforts that we make in meditating on impermanence, on meditating on death. It's the guru devotion with which we engage in those practices that really determines the result. So a person could be doing all of those things kind of without that understanding, and that would hold them back in certain ways. So with that example, a person could also be doing all kinds of virtuous activity and creating all kinds of virtuous, positive karmic seeds, but there's no guarantee that the only guarantee under normal, regular circumstances is that those virtuous seeds will ripen as a positive, useful, constructive, beneficial, supportive experience. But, that doesn't mean that it's going to be connected to our spiritual path in any meaningful way under its own natural power. It could just ripen as wealth, or it could just ripen, and we may not, So in a way, when we dedicate it as causes for enlightenment, then and I don't know all of the necessary, the effect of, good concentration and all of the kinds of things that probably have some impact on that process. But still, we do what we can do when we can do it. But yeah, if we never understood the value of dedication, it's what, we would go our whole lives never doing it. And all of that positive karma would still ripen because the law of cause and effect is inviolable, but it wouldn't be as beneficial, because it would ripen here and there, just as like, oh, now we're wealthy, now we're well respected, now we have power. But we could be a really powerful politician, and could be meaningless. It could be, or we could be a movie star. It could be totally useless, and it could actually cause temptation, and it could connect with other things that would not take us in a good direction. Whereas if we really dedicate it as specific causes, then when it ripens, it will all be connected to a meaningful spiritual result, and it wouldn't have those potentially, meaningless or even potentially harmful, as it could cause us to develop a drug addiction, or to abuse others because we don't have the ethical discipline to handle that power, that authority, etc. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. So then the last thing that we'll cover today is day 196, where Lama Zopa talks about the power of vows. And we've addressed this, I think, in various places. I think Venerable Rabina says, the Buddha is really a big fan of vows, or something like that. That's kind of the vehicle that he's given us, with the one-day vows, the lay vows, the bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, all of the different levels, is really the vehicle that we have. He says there's a big difference between having made a vow in front of a holy object and not having made a vow. Just because we are not actually killing at this moment doesn't mean we're always practicing the virtue of non-killing. And then, he says, say we're in a hospital with our arms and legs in plaster, how can we kill? There's no motivation not to kill. There's no vow. There's no merit, even if we live for 100 years. So he's saying we often just never have an opportunity. There's nothing bothering us. There's no, if we're just kind of going through our lives devoid of things that we want to kill, we've created no real merit. Every once in a while there might be something and we might say, well, no, I shouldn't, and then there's some merit. But he says if we consciously take the vow not to kill, we create incredible virtue every single second, whether we are actively thinking of not killing or not. From the moment we take the vow until the end of our life, we continuously create good karma no matter what we're doing, even if we're doing nothing at all. So they say even if we're asleep, we create virtuous, karma if we've taken vows and if we're not breaking them. We're at least, if we take the vow and we're actively breaking it, that's problematic. But even if we don't have opportunities to uphold the vow, as long as we're not actively counteracting it, then the fact that the vow has been taken is creating virtue in the mind, and that applies, of course, for the one-day vows, the lay vows, and so on. So that's sort of the vehicle that is open to us to create all of this. Again, kind of going back to what he said before, if you know that, and only if you know that, then do you have the opportunity to incorporate that. You may not see it. You may not see a difference between those two things. You may not understand the incredibly powerful karmic difference between those two things. But once you do understand, then you generate an interest in taking the vows seriously and so on. And then all of that incredible positive karma can be accumulated over the course of a lifetime. But yeah, I think we've talked about that. But any thoughts or questions about that?
So, Venerable, I'm curious if we've taken a vow not to kill, and I need to drive to town to get groceries, and I've probably killed 1,000 bugs on the way into town and back. Am I incurring negative karma?
I mean, certainly, it's understood that we can't live, and that's kind of why samsara is not great, because we can't live without killing. But no matter what we do, whether we're just, when we breathe, when we inhale and exhale, there are tiny things that probably we're taking the lives of. So the best we can do, of course, we can think about, just being as mindful as we can, in general, like maybe, looking where, when we're on the sidewalk or we're on the grass, trying to at least be more mindful of that. When you're driving, there's not much you can do comparatively between one thing and another. But the best we can do is to not have any intention, not have any motivation to engage in an act of killing. That's really, the fact that incidentally our lives are going to necessitate that things die. That's unfortunate. But it's really, all we can really do is try our best never to give rise to the intent for that to be what's happening. There are, I think in the Foundation store, there's a mantra sticker or something that is like you can put on your, maybe the Namgyalma, anything that it touches is purified. So that's an option, if you're, interested. People put that mantra on their car so that when bugs do hit it, it's considered, at least they've touched a holy object, because the whole car is said to be purified due to the power of that mantra. So that's at least, a beneficial thing we can do. You can put those on your house, just the sticker on your house, and then your whole house becomes a holy object. And then, of course, we can dedicate when we engage in medicine Buddha, pujas and things, we can recollect, that is true, that sentient beings have died due to, inadvertently due to our actions, and we can make prayers. And at the end of the day, when we do dedication practice, we can, of course, bring to mind that is true. So there are beneficial, useful things that we can try to do as well. But at least, so I would say, yeah, just trying to be mindful and trying to reduce where possible. But really, the emphasis is on completely avoiding any intent.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Would it be more honest or more valid to not take a vow that I vow that I will not kill, but to take a vow I will not intentionally kill?
No, I mean, I think that is the vow. I mean, yeah, I mean, the vow doesn't apply to, you're not, so, I mean, the question that you asked was if there was any negativity involved. Certainly in terms of the vow, you're not breaking the vow. Those could be two different things, whether because even, if there's some negativity that is accumulated when not all of the factors are complete, not all the 4 factors are complete, you have an incomplete karma. So you can't, it's not even the karma of killing, but still some negativity is there. But certainly in terms of the vows, if it wasn't intentional, then I wouldn't worry about, that a vow was broken.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll end there for today. So we'll just end with dedication. So we think back to the positive intention that we set, and we think that by having listened and contemplated, participated, we've actualized that motivation, created positive energy in the mind. That positive energy will ripen in a beneficial way, and so we particularly bring to mind connecting it to our spiritual path, our spiritual goals, our goal of enlightenment. So just on your own, strongly visualize the ways in which you dedicate that positive energy to ripen in your spiritual lives. All right. So today's Thursday, and we'll meet again on Monday. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks so much.